Hey, good day, everybody. And again, welcome to another very exciting episode of the OIG Roundtable. It is an OIG Roundtable today. I've been very confused as to whether it's an OIG Files, an OIG Roundtable. Is it LinkedIn Live? I get confused. But it's an OIG Roundtable, and the way you know that is because I've got my three OIG compadres, Matt Kachansky, retired executive from HHS OIG, Office of Investigations, former or retired, I guess. We don't like to say former because it always implies something nefarious. Retired from OIG and then retired as the Northeast UPIC director. Jaysen Eisengrind, also retired HHS OIG and the retired Western UPIC director. We've got Wade back. Wade was out on assignment. I feel like he was out like working for one of the local media channels on assignment last week. We've got Wade back, retired HHS OIG agent and assistant special agent in charge out of LA. And we've got a special, I'm still Eric Rubenstein, the director of litigation, fraud, waste, and abuse here, and and one of the OIG Roundtable guys. And we got a special guest today, and that special guest is Earl Bock. Earl, I'm going to let you introduce yourself in a minute. Our topic today, which is what's going to make this timely, is Earl Bock is among other things, he is the law enforcement liaison for Highmark, which is the Blue Cross Blue Shield plan of Pennsylvania. But Earl, I want to turn over to you. Please give us an introduction. I want to know about your background because your background is what got you to your front ground over at Highmark. So Earl, tell us, where'd you come from and what do you do now?
So I came from law enforcement and I worked almost 30 years in law enforcement. It was all relatively local here in Pennsylvania, South Central Pennsylvania. My last job that I had before coming over to Highmark was with the County District Attorney's Office in Cumberland County, which is where I live. And I was hired as an insurance fraud investigator. I was hired on an insurance fraud grant. And for the time that I spent with the District Attorney's Office, I did all lines of business. So we didn't do just healthcare. It was property casualty. It was auto. It was a little bit of everything. But because Highmark has one of its largest offices located here in Cumberland County, we did a lot of business with Highmark. And it just so happened at the time, the SIU director at Highmark was an old friend of mine. It was a retired state police trooper, and he was running the SIU department at Highmark. And when he decided to retire in 2010, excuse me, because I had so much interaction and had done a lot of business, a lot of cases with them and got him a lot of money back, he encouraged me to put in for the job. And one thing led to another. And, here I am, a little more than 12 years later, and I'm still in the SIU and loving what I do. I like the work that I do. I like the people that I work with, but all good things must come to an end. So, I'm getting ready to pull the pin and retire for the third time now.
Yeah, and I know we talked about that, and I don't know if you'll have a fourth chapter. Jaysen's retired twice, and Matt's now retired twice as well. So maybe you can see where that's going to go. But
see if the third time's a charm.
Yeah, that's absolutely what they say. So Highmark is a little bit of a unique organization in the payer space, in the sense that, so first, the director of your payment integrity group is also retired federal law enforcement, not HHS OIG. I don't hold that against him because he is a good guy, but he comes from a long white collar career as well, which kind of makes Highmark a little bit of a unique animal in some regards, because you've got a director who understands the interaction and the importance of having someone in a law enforcement liaison capacity. And, we were talking just before we started to record this that, we're doing a fair amount now of SIU process improvement analyses for payers, where we're coming in and kind of helping them with shaping and forming their SIU 2.0 or 3.0, as it may be, whether it be policies and procedures, whether it just be staffing and things of that sort. One of the things that we've noticed along the way is that a lot of plans do not have an Earl Bock, a dedicated law enforcement person who speaks healthcare, who speaks the legal and all of that. And so, Wade, I want to go to you first, because you as an ASAC, in your role when you weren't working cases directly, I know a lot of what your responsibilities were that liaisoning with the plans, whether it be a Medicaid MCO, whether it be a payer. And so I want to turn to you, and really I want to talk about sort of that context, but then also, have you and Earl talk a little bit about, currently you're one of our senior people on one of our SIU contracts where we're providing some staff augmentation, and sort of how you see the importance of that role. Like, Earl's role is an invaluable role because he gets to interact in ways that most SIU staff can't. So, Wade, I want to turn it over to you and just kind of talk about, as an ASAC, that the importance of that responsibility.
Okay, yeah, you're right. That was a lot of what I did was liaison with, the UPICs, the ZPICs, whatever it was at the time. We'd also have large kind of MCC type deconfliction meetings with other law enforcement agencies as well as private payers. So I got my kind of feet wet doing that and looking at it from the OIG ASAC perspective. And a lot of it was when we would meet with, the UPICs or the ZPICs, a lot of it was they would select cases and basically pitch them to us. And their goal pretty much was that ideally they wanted us to accept the case and work it criminally or civilly, but ideally criminally. So that was kind of my upbringing, doing those types of encounters with our partners. And I see it a little bit differently from the SIU side of it now. Again, like I said before, it was always, at least the sense was that their goal was to have you accept the case as a referral. Now, being on the SIU side, I'm kind of learning that there's a little bit different take, at least with the SIU that I'm working with, and it's more of getting money back. It's a ROI situation, and I think that has a priority over cases being, pitched to the Medicaid Fraud Control Unit or MFD or whoever. So it's really just a different approach, and I don't know if part of that is because there isn't a law enforcement liaison. Maybe that would at least open some dialogue on the pros and cons to working a case criminally or civilly versus just getting the ROI back. But I'm seeing it just from a different point of view now. And also some of just the mechanics of the cases are a little bit different. There's some cases that I had worked that were referred to the Mafuku, and once we get subpoenas or requests for information for our case file, it was always my understanding, like, you should give them everything that you've generated, all your interview reports, any data analysis you did, basically everything should go to them. And I'm finding that that's not the case as much either. They're a little bit more restrictive on sending internal documentation. So I prepped like a big file to send to them so that they could have everything, because I discussed it with the prosecutor and the detective a couple days prior. So I had everything in the file ready to go, and I was basically told, like, yeah, that's not how we do it. We don't give them everything. So it's just a different perspective from the federal, government side versus now being more in the corporate side.
So Earl, one thing that Wade brought up, which is kind of an interesting point, which is obviously in instances where you think that there is a fraud versus a waste and abuse, where it's not going to be an overpayment or something like that, where there's going to be that referral. To what extent are you playing in your role as this liaison in helping to put together a referral to law enforcement?
Yeah. So let me say, Eric, that one of the challenges that comes into play when you're talking about releasing information outside of the company is where the SIU sits within the corporate environment. A lot of SIUs sit with the corporate audit and compliance area, which is where Highmark has us. But there are many, even within the Blues, that their SIU is contained within their legal department, and so there's that overview umbrella sort of thing where legal has to kind of bless everything that goes out the door. before it happens and so forth. So we're fortunate from the standpoint that that we sit within audit and compliance, and they really kind of leave us alone. And we have a VP that oversees our SIU, and as much as Ed's a great boss that I directly work for, Kurt Spear, who is our VP. He is very supportive of the law enforcement function that we support also. What helps, I think, with our situation is that a lot of the other SIUs don't have a person who is in a management type position or in a decision-making position of what cases go to law enforcement, what cases don't go to law enforcement, that have a law enforcement background. So the nice thing that I have, having come not only from law enforcement, but having come from an environment where I was investigating and prosecuting insurance fraud / healthcare fraud cases, that I know what I needed in order to take it to my assistant district attorney and say, this case is ready to go. Let's file the charges and let's prosecute this case. So what ends up happening with me is the cases that I don't directly oversee and investigate, I assist the other investigators within our SIU department with those cases. So the way our policy is set up, if they have a case that they think is ready to go to law enforcement, they review it with me and their manager. And then I review all the issues, what they have, and I make a decision whether it's ready to go to law enforcement, or maybe, hey, we're not quite there yet. Let's try doing some member interviews. Let's try doing, this or that or the other thing, because we're not quite there yet. And if we are ready to go to law enforcement, what law enforcement agency are we going to send it to? Based on the information that we have, are we looking at, a federal agency because we're involved with a national provider that not only is going to impact Highmark, but is also potentially going to impact other insurance companies across the country? Are we dealing with, a kickback scheme? Unfortunately, in Pennsylvania does not have a kickback statute. So if we're looking very heavily at, say, a kickback scenario, then obviously a federal agency such as the FBI, or if we have government dollars involving Medicare, Medicaid, HHS, OIG, do we want to go postal? Is there a lot of drugs involved that we want to get DEA involved? So that decision rests on me then to say, okay, this is definitely a federal case. We need to get in contact with whoever. Also, because we're in 4 different states, where's the best place for us to go that we're going to have jurisdiction and venue with the U.S. Attorney's Office or with the State Attorney General's office, wherever it happens to be in that particular area for that case.
So that's actually. So there's a lot to unpack there, Earl, but one of the things that's kind of really one of the things that's really important there is what you just said, the last piece, which is venue. A lot of the plans that we are dealing with are plans that may transcend states and cross state lines. And I think, people who come from a law enforcement background like us and you understand these things and understand as time goes on. And now that you've been in this role a long time and you've made contacts, which is the other piece, right? Law enforcement people want to talk to law enforcement people. It's just the mentality that to be able to have those granular conversations for things like a venue, what is going to make a case a good pitch, right? Like someone like you who understands what is an ADA like because you were in that space really does go a really long way. So Jaysen, I want to go to you because one of the things that I know that you did before you left and retired from the UPIC West was you brought in one of our former coworkers as well to kind of help with looking at cases in the UPIC West and maybe some of the other jurisdictions in the UPIC where your former employer is, to help with doing that, sort of work in this quasi law enforcement capacity, look at case files, make some identifications of things. What did you see? Number one, I think, what did you see were the things that made you feel like you needed that person? And two, what was the benefit of bringing that person in as a result?
Thank you. So the position that Earl has and those that have a similar position is extremely important to the operation of an SIU. And the reason is that we're not blessed with an unlimited amount of resources, and it's about resource management. And part of that resource management is communication, which you just referred to. So, if you don't understand venue, as you said, I will also say something called intent. How many times have we looked at investigative results and said, this is, somebody ought to do something about this. This is horrible, but you cannot, establish intent. There might be something that has to be handled either administratively or through a civil prosecution rather than a criminal prosecution. So not wasting time allows you to have better control of your resources. And it also builds the relationship when you're not spinning the wheels of the organizations that you're pitching these things to. Ultimately, the benefit is having investigations that you're not spending a lot of time on if they really don't merit law enforcement attention or not.
Yeah, so it's a lot of it is efficiencies. And Earl, I'm going to go back to you for a minute, and then I'm going to turn it over to Matt. But I think one of my take homes has always been that Jaysen kind of hit the nail on the head, is this whole premise of it's resource allocation, right? There aren't an unlimited number of resources. Cases sometimes take a while to get completed because of resource issues. We're seeing here some instances where U.S. attorneys' offices are declining pretty decent key TAMs because of resource allocation issues. Have you found so you spent 30 years in law enforcement, and you already know that resources are sparse in the law enforcement world. And now you've been at Highmark for 12 years or so, and you've kind of been, through this. Have you noticed that while there are some resource allocation issues, obviously Highmark doesn't have an unlimited budget to hire 100 investigators. Are you finding that there are some efficiencies that have just that you've seen kind of inherently grow and develop from you being this person to kind of help? Obviously, you're not a manager and a supervisor in that sense, but to help shape and direct the focus of where a particular investigation should go to maximize those sparse resources.
Yeah, so one of the things that I really try and instill in the other investigators that I assist them with their cases with, and that is that the more we can do up front before it's turned over to law enforcement, the more inviting and the better chance we have of getting law enforcement to accept it and to run with it, knowing full well that if we interview a member, more than likely, if they're integral to the investigation, law enforcement is probably going to interview them again. However, I think the more information that we can gather up front, the better. That's kind of why I'm in the position that I'm in now, and that is that we have a lot of young folks that are coming in. We've had some turnover over the years. We have several individuals that have been with Highmark for a long time, and they are great investigators, and they take very minimal oversight on my part. But there are a lot of younger ones that came from other areas of the company that really didn't understand investigations, didn't realize how heavily we get involved with law enforcement and how much we deal with them. We've just had over the last year, we met and conducted summits with in the various federal districts in our 4-state footprint, and presented to them, here's what Highmark has to offer to you. Call us when you need something, whether it's, data or, we have several undercover accounts that we have set up that we can issue undercover cards to investigators that are going to go in and do undercover activities with providers and so forth. So, making them understand what all we have to offer to law enforcement is as big a part as the actual investigation itself. And, I always said that, bringing somebody from another part that understands the claims process and everything is teaching them how to investigate a case is much easier than bringing somebody in from the outside who has law enforcement investigative background, but they need to learn this whole system that is so confusing and can get so involved and whatnot. But the big thing with me is working with these individuals and kind of instilling them what I have to offer and what I can teach them so that they can become better investigators and understand what is going to be needed in order for a case to be transferred over to law enforcement and make law enforcement more, make it more appetizing for law enforcement to say, hey, this is a really good case. We want to run with this.
Right.
And moving forward from that point on.
Right. Yeah. I mean, a couple of good points there. So first of all, you didn't use the term, but I will, and I know we all use this term. Is what makes the case sexy? Right.
Yeah.
It's all about making it a sexy case, right? Because you have to have, there's always that factor, like what makes this something that would be attractive to law enforcement. But, the other key piece of this is, there are a lot of people that go into the SIU space from law enforcement and post-retirement, but they never did healthcare fraud, right? So they don't understand, the value of someone who has a prior healthcare background from the law enforcement perspective. We used to have people over at the OIG who would always say that the Office of Investigations was the premier healthcare fraud law enforcement organization. And I think that, to an extent, the level of truth in that is that, at OIG, we weren't the jack of all trades, master of nothing. We did healthcare. We only did healthcare, and we really were and are the best at it because that's all we do. And that's an important piece. I think you being in the position that you've been in for 12 years, you brought that sort of subject matter expertise, but you brought that really niche piece of the puzzle that a lot of other people can't bring into it to help with understanding what makes something sexy and the like. And the last thing, and I'm going to turn it over to Matt for the kind of last piece of this, is you mentioned very briefly this whole premise of these undercover cards and these undercover identities that go on. And that's an important piece in the law enforcement world when it comes to doing some of these healthcare fraud cases, is the ability to have an undercover card for claim submission to see what the fraud really is. I think the only people that fully understand the importance of that, the ability to do it the right way, the backstopping, the ability to be able to flag the claims, do all that. That interplay is super, super important, particularly if you're talking about, for example, when I was in New York and New Jersey, we would do a lot of undercovers where we were using a Part D plan card or a Medicare Advantage card, where you really need to be able to track that stuff immediately from point of sale, on something, if it's a mail order prescription or, whatever it may be. And that's a unique piece of the puzzle that I think some smaller plans don't fully understand, because the person that's working in that capacity is someone who's never come from that environment. And so when a request may come in for, hey, can you get me an undercover card? Like, a what? It's just never something, that's part of that. So it's definitely an important piece of that puzzle.
Well, and I think there's a trust issue there too, Eric, from the standpoint that, information that's going on that involves law enforcement that no one else should really know what's going on. And I think there can certainly be a trust issue. I know, having come from that environment along with the rest of you, that you're dealing with a person that you don't really know, and you don't know what their background is or anything. There's certainly some trust issues there. When you're dealing with someone that has come from that side of the house and has been involved in that before, I think there's a greater trust, or there's a better trust, and not just with undercover situations, but also with just being willing to divulge information that I know that I've gotten from various law enforcement agents over the years, that more than likely my colleagues wouldn't have gotten access to that same information. Certainly not anything to the level of you're violating grand jury, secrecy orders or anything like that, but certainly from the standpoint that you divulge pieces of your case that you wouldn't normally divulge outside of the law enforcement inner circle, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, exactly. And the great point of that is that I think what people always need to understand is that when law enforcement is dealing with non-law enforcement on things like this, it's typically a one-way street. A guy that mentored me in my career would always say, and that would be Jaysen Eisengrine. He would always say, "I'm here to receive information. I'm not here to give it. I'm sorry." When people in an interview would say, "Can I ask some questions?" I remember Jaysen would always say, "Sure, you can always ask any question you want. Whether I can answer it or not is another story, because I'm here to receive information, not give it." And I think that in someone like in your role, you understand that. I think, a general SIU investigator who's interacting with law enforcement may not understand that. They get done with the call, they hang up the phone, and they're all angry because they're like, they're asking me for information, I'm asking them for things, they're not sharing it. Whereas you don't even ask the questions. Sometimes you may ask the questions, but it's all good if that answer isn't given, because the relationship is something you already understand, how it should go. So yeah, these are super important points. So Matt, I want to turn over to you for the last piece. So you've taken the lead on a couple of these SIU improvement things. And when you were at the Northeast UPIC, you spent a lot of time in working to rewrite and tighten up and shore up some of the policies and procedures that you were able to, that weren't necessarily a program integrity manual specific, or anything like that. But obviously, when we talk internally, we talk a lot about the importance of a law enforcement liaison. Where you were, you didn't have one, did you, at your UPIC?
It was mostly me. I was the one leading the meetings with the OIG. When I started, I wasn't the PD, I was a fraud manager, but it was actually law enforcement liaison consultant. So I was working with each of the investigators. I was training them on how to put a referral package together. If they're going to be quoting the law, what are the elements of that law? What is the evidence that you have in support of those elements of the law? How have you gone into the brain of the provider to find that intent? How do you bring that out in a referral to show the OIG, here's what's wrong, here's why it's wrong, here is the evidence of that, here's why the provider knows it's wrong, and here's the extent of the fraud, so that they get a picture of this is how bad it is, and this is the evidence against them. So I spent a lot of time doing that, and it was kind of disconcerting in the lack of understanding that a lot of the investigators had, just in terms of the judicial process. They didn't know the difference between an indictment and an arrest, a conviction and a sentencing. They had no idea. So it was training all of that. But what I wanted to get to here is all of that. And Earl, you touched upon it in your last comments. It's all trust. And it's trust that goes beyond being able to, tell secrets, or, I've got some information I want to share with you. It's trust in the decision-making process, where Wade, you talked about the dichotomy between an SIU wanting to, bring back money versus refer. If you can build that trust relationship through a law enforcement liaison, you can build that trust of someone saying, hey, we've got this good case. We'd like to go and collect the overpayment on this, or at least put them on payment suspension. We don't believe that's going to compromise your investigation, because we have this evidence already in place that you can go forward with, so that they'll allow you to do those things, or even allow you to say, hey, this case, we're going to keep this case instead of sending it to you because we think it's administrative in nature, and allow them to trust that decision. In some of the recent reviews that we've done, the states and the state mafukus and things that we're dealing with grab everything from the SIUs, because they don't trust the decisions that they're making. So they're going to look at it, whether it's crap or not, hold on to it until they get to it, waste their resources reviewing those things. And then also on the other side of it, the SIUs are stuck there not being able to collect anything because the case is out of their hands. It's building that trust between the SIU and the stakeholders that the law enforcement liaison can really be the linchpin of that.
Yeah, so those are important points, and that's one of the things, so one of the things that we do here, Earl, our internal SIU team, which is made up of about 8 or 10 people. Matt's part of that. We've got somebody else who's a retired law enforcement person. We've got a whole team of retired agents and prior law enforcement. We have some people that have very similar backgrounds to you. And what we are learning is that on those contracts that they're doing, where we're the outsourced SIU, when they are interacting with the state, Mafuku, or whomever that may be, we find that those conversations go really smoothly. They are really seamless conversations, because part of that conversation is exactly what Matt's talking about. Hey, we know we need to present this case to you because of the requirement under the state statute, but we think that this is a case that's more geared for us to treat as an overpayment than for you to take as a case. And obviously the push-pull, as you learned from having done this, is the SIUs, if they kept the case, they can just treat it as a overpayment, collect the money, and then you're good. And the problem is that law enforcement takes cases. We saw it at the OIG. We would have a case for 2 or 3 years. U.S. Attorney's Office would ultimately decline it. Civil division would decline it criminally, right? Or civilly, rather. Then we would go to Office of Counsel to the Inspector General. Maybe they weren't interested. We'd go and give that case back to the organization that sent it to us, whether it be the ZPIC, then the UPICs, and the payers would then be really upset, because they already worked on the case for a year. We had it for 2 or 3 years for a prosecutor to decline it. And then it's back to the payer, who then has to deal with a 4.5-year-old case, maybe longer, to try to resolve it. And so that interplay becomes really important from both the statute of limitations perspective, things that I think only people that are in these kind of very specialized positions like you are, kind of get. So, these are all super important, important points. Jaysen, go ahead. Do you have something you want to add to this?
Yeah, I do, Eric. And, this may sound a little bit like a sales pitch, but now, having looked at a number of process improvements that can happen in SIUs, this is one that kind of sticks out as a sore thumb sometimes. And, the reality is that, again, resources are limited. Can the SIU support a full-time employee that's doing this? Maybe yes, maybe no. So in my former role in the UPIC, yeah, it did support it. There were, 500 investigations going on in a year, and 130 FTEs. So yeah, there would be, but in a smaller SIU, that might not be possible. So having a resource that can plug and play is really the business case for that solution.
Yeah, that's a good point. Earl, I want to turn it over to you guys. We're running out of time, but I want to turn it over to you to obviously reply to that, but I want to give you, as our guest, the final say.
Yeah, so and I wear many hats at Highmark. Law Enforcement Liaison is just one of many, but I would say that there is more than enough, at least with our company anyhow, to keep a full-time individual busy. So in addition to reviewing these cases and everything like that, anything that comes in from law enforcement in the way of an RFI or a court order comes to me. And generally, I handle just about all of those myself. If there's other requests that come in from non-government agencies, such as the IMEDIC, or that comes in from various Department of Insurance agencies and so forth, that they want information or whatever like that, all of that comes in. So there's a central point, so that a lot of times when subpoenas or RFIs are sent into a company the size of Highmark, they can get lost somewhere in the shuffle before they eventually get back to where they should be. The nice thing about our situation is, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing over the years, my name is spread around the company. So when someone calls in and they say the F word, fraud, my phone automatically starts ringing, or I get an email forwarded to me from our CEO's office. I mean, even as high as that within our company. So anything that comes into our fraud hotline and so forth, whether it be our corporate fraud hotline or our FEP fraud hotline, usually gets diverted over to me. So, I mean, you can kind of contour that position to include as many things as you want to, when it comes down to it. But having that one central point of location, whether it's a person or whether it's a small unit, I mean, theoretically, probably they could have two of me doing my job, and everybody still stays busy and whatnot. But it's worked out well for us. I don't want to say that we're necessarily an innovator when it comes to that, but this started back a number of years ago, even before Ed Worth, my director, came on board, and essentially my director at the time said, give me an ideal job description of what you would like to be doing, within Highmark. And I thought he was kidding. I thought he was just screwing with me. And I put it all down, and that's essentially what my job has become. If it gets to a point where someone needs to come and testify, I'm the person that gets tapped to do that. So, there's a lot of advantages to having this position. Quite honestly, I don't see any adverse reasoning not to have it, other than, as you were saying, monetary constraints and those kinds of things. But I think it's worked out very well for the company. The anticipation is that, when I leave, that hopefully they're going to replace me with someone else that has that kind of a background that can continue the momentum that we've developed over the years. And not even just with law enforcement in our footprint, but I mean, I field requests and court orders and stuff literally from all over the country. I mean, I get stuff from California, from Texas, from Florida, you name it. And I have been fortunate enough to develop a good relationship with all of those people, and to have kind of made myself into that subject matter expert that was of design, I think, for the position that I hold here at Highmark. So certainly willing to talk with anybody else about how to get something like that started, or how we came to be where we are. But I'm very proud of the work that we all do, not just me, but our entire SIU and the group that we work with on a daily basis. But again, I can't say enough about our management, and it goes literally almost to the top of our company, the support that we get, and from them in taking these cases to law enforcement, where, as you were saying before, it's not always about the money coming back in the door. I mean, obviously we have an ROI, and we like to see that money come back in, but when all else fails and we know that the money's just not there because it's gone, there's got to be an alternative. And I think we've gotten our management to understand that sometimes you might have to get somebody locked up and put in jail as an alternative to bringing money back to the company. So.
Yeah, it's definitely a slippery slope, right? The balance of getting
Sure.
that money back on the ROI versus prosecuting. Look, you brought up a lot of really good and important points. I mean, the receipt of subpoenas and processing court orders and all of that, it really does need to be a central, focal place. Particularly, and to Jaysen's point, it may not always have to be, and you said it too, it may not always have to be a full-time person, right? It could be one person, and again, Jaysen said not to make this a sales pitch, but we're kind of doing that now, where it's like, hey, we only need somebody for 5 or 10 hours a month. Another plan needs it for 5 or 10 hours a month, and you just kind of make this, this collective where it's a part-time position, for a bunch of different plans. I can tell you, we've seen it here, and I can see it from my past lives, that some of these smaller plans their SIUs are so immature that when they actually get something where they think they don't even know where to go. They have no idea, they get a subpoena and they have no idea how to deal with it, because it's a smaller plan. They don't really get a lot of these. When they do have a fraud case that they do on refer, they don't know how to communicate. They don't know who to even go to. They don't know who to speak to or any of that. So those are all super important pieces of the puzzle, because it doesn't necessarily have to be an FTE. It can be someone who's in a kind of a sliver, but hey, we're doing this for 10 different plans, and it's one person who kind of, works in that role. The other good piece is that, like, at least for us, is that when we do that, we see what the fraud schemes are across different plans, because we're hearing about it. And then you start to learn about how things transcend. When you're doing that, it then lets you become actionable for other things. So it really does serve an amazing role. So look, we're out of time. We could probably talk about this for hours on end. Of
Yes,
course,
we
you've been
could.
in this role for a long time, and obviously you see the importance and the value of it. We see it when we do our reviews, where there can be efficiencies made. So Earl, as always, it's good to see you. It's good to spend time with you on this. It's good to see you in person when we get to see each other in person.
It is.
And I, I'd love to have you on again to talk more about this stuff, and we'll look to do that. As always, Wade, Jaysen, and Matt, it's always good to see you guys virtually and otherwise. So again, for everyone, thanks again for tuning in. If you do not get our newsletter, please send us an email, hello@advise, ADVIZE, health1word.com. We can get you onto that newsletter. Keep a lookout for some more of our LinkedIn Lives. We've got another one scheduled for March. Myself and Robert Lyles, healthcare attorney, going to be a really good conversation. We're going to talk about administrative things, NCDs, LCDs, strict liability, and the like. So as always, we thank you for the support. If you want to see more of our podcasts and the like, feel free to find us on YouTube. Just go to YouTube, search for us. You can also find us on Spotify and a bunch of other podcast platforms. So as always, to my compadres, thanks very much for tuning in, and we'll see you at the next one.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.